The year was 1997, and like every other morning for the past 3 years, Sarah Mitchell started her day at 6 a.m. sharp. As a United States Postal Service mail carrier, she took pride in her route through the suburban neighborhoods of Riverside County. Her colleagues knew her as reliable, punctual, and someone who genuinely cared about the people on her route. She remembered their names, asked about their families, and even kept dog treats in her mail truck for the neighborhood pets, who had become her daily companions. On that fateful Tuesday morning in September, Sarah followed her usual routine. She loaded her mail truck with the day's deliveries, checked her manifest, and headed out for what should have been just another ordinary day. Her route covered approximately 500 addresses across a mix of residential streets and small businesses. The weather was pleasant, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that made it perfect for walking her route. But as the hours passed, something was terribly wrong. By 3 p.m., when Sarah should have returned to the postal facility, her truck was nowhere to be found. Her supervisor, Jim Henderson, initially thought she might have had mechanical problems or was dealing with a particularly heavy delivery day. But when 5 p.m. came and went with no word from Sarah, concern turned to alarm. The last confirmed sighting of Sarah was at approximately 11:30 a.m., when Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a 78-year-old retiree, saw her delivering mail to the house across the street. Mrs. Patterson later told investigators that Sarah had waved at her as she always did, and everything seemed completely normal. There was nothing to suggest that within hours, Sarah would simply vanish without a trace. When the Postal Service reported Sarah missing, the local police department launched an immediate search operation. They began by retracing her route, stopping at every address she was scheduled to visit that day. The investigation revealed that Sarah had successfully completed approximately 60% of her deliveries before disappearing. The remaining mail was found scattered in her truck, which was discovered abandoned in a remote area near the old industrial district. About 15 miles from her last known location, the discovery of the empty mail truck only deepened the mystery. The vehicle showed no signs of struggle or forced entry. Sarah's personal belongings, including her purse and keys, were still inside. Even more puzzling was the fact that her mail bag was only partially empty, suggesting she had been in the middle of her route when something happened. The truck's engine was still running when it was found, as if someone had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. Detective Maria Rodriguez was assigned to lead the investigation. With over 15 years of experience in missing persons cases, she had seen her share of mysterious disappearances, but Sarah's case was particularly baffling. There were no witnesses to any altercation, no evidence of foul play, and no apparent motive for someone to harm a well-liked mail carrier. The investigation expanded to include interviews with everyone on Sarah's route. Her family, friends, and co-workers. Sarah's family was devastated by her disappearance. Her husband, Michael, told police that their marriage was happy and stable. They had been planning a vacation to visit Sarah's sister in Colorado, and she had been excited about the trip. Her 2 teenage children, Emma and Jake, couldn't understand how their mother could just disappear. Sarah's sister, Linda, flew in from Denver to help with the search efforts and to support the family during this impossible time. The investigation revealed that Sarah was not someone who would voluntarily disappear. She had no history of mental illness, no financial problems, and no known enemies. Her bank accounts remained untouched, and there was no activity on her credit cards after the day she vanished. Phone records showed no unusual calls or messages. Every lead that investigators pursued seemed to hit a dead-end dot. As weeks turned into months, the case grew cold. The media attention that had initially surrounded Sarah's disappearance began to fade. Her family organized search parties, distributed flyers, and even hired a private investigator, but no new evidence emerged. The Postal Service installed a memorial plaque at the facility where Sarah had worked, and her route was permanently reassigned to other carriers. Detective Rodriguez never forgot about Sarah's case. Even as new investigations demanded her attention, she would periodically review the file, hoping to find something that had been overlooked. She kept in regular contact with Sarah's family, updating them on any developments, no matter how minor. The detective had developed a theory that Sarah might have witnessed something she wasn't supposed to see, or perhaps encountered someone from her past, but without evidence, it remained just speculation. The Mitchell family struggled to move forward with their lives while living in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Michael found it difficult to explain to well-meaning friends and neighbors that not knowing what happened to his wife was in many ways worse than knowing she was gone. The children coped as best they could, but the absence of closure made the grieving process nearly impossible. Years passed, and life in the community slowly returned to normal. New families moved into the neighborhood, and many of the newer residents had never heard of Sarah Mitchell. But for those who remembered her, she remained a topic of conversation whenever discussions turned to local mysteries or unsolved cases. Then, in 2004, 7 years after Sarah's disappearance, the city announced a major infrastructure project. The old canal system that ran through the industrial district was going to be drained and cleaned as part of a revitalization effort. The canals had been part of the area's irrigation system dating back to the early 1900s, but had fallen into disuse and become something of an eyesore, filled with stagnant water and debris. The draining process began on a Monday morning in October. City workers and contractors used massive pumps to remove thousands of gallons of murky water that had accumulated over the decades. As the water level dropped, the true extent of what had been hidden beneath the surface began to emerge. The canal bottom was littered with shopping carts, old tires, construction debris, and years of accumulated trash. But on the third day of the draining operation, workers made a discovery that would shock the entire community. Partially buried in the mud and silt at the bottom of the canal was the unmistakable outline of a vehicle. As more water was pumped out and the mud was carefully excavated, it became clear that they had found a mail truck. The discovery immediately attracted the attention of law enforcement. Detective Rodriguez, who had been promoted to lieutenant but was still with the same department, arrived at the scene within hours of the initial report. As the truck was carefully extracted from the canal, her heart raced with the possibility that they might finally have answers about what happened to Sarah Mitchell. The mail truck was in remarkably good condition considering it had been submerged for 7 years. The mud and silt had actually helped preserve many of the truck's features, and the license plate was still clearly visible. It was indeed Sarah's truck, the same vehicle that had been reported as found abandoned 15 miles away in 1997. But this discovery created a new mystery. How had the truck ended up in the canal when it had been found abandoned in a completely different location? Detective Rodriguez realized that the truck found in 1997 must have been a different vehicle, possibly planted there to throw off the investigation. This revelation meant that the entire case would need to be re-examined from the beginning. As investigators processed the scene, they made an even more significant discovery. Inside the truck, preserved by the anaerobic environment of the canal, mud were human remains. The coroner's office would later confirm through dental records that the remains belonged to Sarah Mitchell. After 7 years of uncertainty, her family would finally have answers, though not the ones they had hoped for. The condition of the remains and the truck's position in the canal suggested that Sarah had died in what appeared to be an accident. Investigators theorized that she might have taken a wrong turn while trying to avoid traffic or construction, ended up near the canal, and somehow lost control of her vehicle. The truck had gone into the water, and Sarah had been unable to escape. However, This theory raised its own questions. How had another mail truck ended up abandoned miles away from the canal? Why had no one reported seeing or hearing a vehicle go into the water? The industrial area around the canal wasn't heavily traveled, but it wasn't completely deserted either. The case that had seemed solved by the discovery in the canal was actually becoming more complex. The revelation that a different truck had been found in 1997 suggested that someone had deliberately tried to mislead the investigation. This indicated that Sarah's death might not have been an accident after all. Detective Rodriguez began to suspect that someone had killed Sarah, disposed of her body and truck in the canal, and then planted another mail truck to make it appear that she had simply abandoned her vehicle and disappeared. The investigation was reopened with renewed vigor. Advanced forensic techniques that hadn't been available in 1997 were now applied to the evidence. The truck was examined for fingerprints, DNA evidence, and any other clues that might point to what really happened. The remains were subjected to detailed forensic analysis to determine the exact cause of death. Sarah's family experienced a complex mix of emotions upon learning of the discovery. Relief at finally knowing what happened to her was tempered by grief at having their worst fears confirmed. Michael Mitchell told reporters that while he was devastated to learn of his wife's death, he was grateful that the uncertainty was finally over. Their children, now adults, struggled to process the news after living for so many years with the hope that their mother might still be alive. The forensic analysis revealed evidence that supported the theory that Sarah's death was not accidental. The position of her remains in the truck, combined with other physical evidence, suggested that she had been the victim of foul play. However, identifying her killer would prove to be an even greater challenge than finding her body had been. Detective Rodriguez and her team began the painstaking process of re-interviewing witnesses, reviewing old evidence, and following up on leads that had been considered dead ends years earlier. They also investigated how someone had obtained a second mail truck to use in the cover-up. This line of inquiry led them to examine Postal Service records and to interview current and former employees who might have had access to multiple vehicles. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A former postal worker named David Chun, who had worked at the same facility as Sarah, came forward after hearing about the discovery. Chun had left the Postal Service shortly after Sarah's disappearance and had moved to another state. He told investigators that he had always suspected a coworker named Robert Valdez of being involved in Sarah's disappearance, but had been too afraid to speak up at the time. According to Chun, Valdez had been obsessed with Sarah and had repeatedly asked her out despite her clear rejection of his advances. Chun said that Valdez had become increasingly angry and unstable in the weeks leading up to Sarah's disappearance. He also recalled that Valdez had access to spare mail trucks and had extensive knowledge of the local area, including the canal system. When investigators located Valdez, they discovered that he had left the area shortly after Sarah's disappearance and had been living under an assumed name in Nevada. His behavior upon being questioned was suspicious, and his alibi for the day Sarah vanished fell apart under scrutiny. Most significantly, forensic evidence from the truck matched DNA samples obtained from Valdez. The arrest of Robert Valdez brought the Sarah Mitchell case to a close, but it also raised questions about how the investigation had been handled initially. If the connection to Valdez had been discovered in 1997, Sarah might have been found much sooner, and her family might have been spared years of anguish. The case became a lesson in the importance of thoroughly investigating all leads, no matter how insignificant they might seem at the time. Valdez was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his trial, Prosecutors presented evidence that he had killed Sarah when she rejected his advances, then disposed of her body and truck in the canal. He had then used his knowledge of postal operations to plant another truck and staged the scene to make it appear that Sarah had simply abandoned her vehicle. The resolution of the case brought some measure of peace to Sarah's family, though they struggled with the knowledge that she had died at the hands of someone she had worked with and trusted. The Postal Service implemented new safety protocols and background check procedures in response to the case. A memorial garden was established in Sarah's honor at the facility where she had worked. Detective Rodriguez, who had dedicated 7 years of her career to solving this case, reflected on the importance of never giving up on missing persons investigations. She noted that advances in forensic science and the willingness of witnesses to come forward, even years later, can sometimes provide the breakthrough needed to solve even the most challenging cases. The story of Sarah Mitchell serves as a reminder that behind every missing person case is a family living with uncertainty and hope. It also demonstrates how the dedication of law enforcement officers, combined with community support and advances in investigative techniques, can eventually bring justice even when cases seem hopeless. Today, the canal where Sarah's truck was found has been filled in and converted into a community park. A small plaque near the entrance honors her memory and serves as a reminder of the importance of workplace safety and the need to take threats of violence seriously. Sarah's case has been featured in several true crime documentaries and continues to be studied by law enforcement agencies as an example of how patience, persistence, and new technology can solve even the most challenging cold cases. The Mitchell family has found ways to honor Sarah's memory while moving forward with their lives. They established a scholarship fund for young people pursuing careers in public service, and they regularly speak at conferences about the impact of violent crime on families. While they will never fully recover from their loss, they have found purpose in helping others and ensuring that Sarah's story serves as a warning about the dangers that can lurk in seemingly safe environments. This case reminds us that justice, while sometimes delayed, can still be served. It shows us the importance of community support for families of missing persons, the dedication of law enforcement officers who refuse to give up on cold cases, and the power of speaking up when we witness concerning behavior. Most importantly, it honors the memory of Sarah Mitchell, a dedicated postal worker who deserved better than the fate that befell her, but whose story ultimately led to justice and important changes in workplace safety protocols.
Content